Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And I have one of my best friends in the world here with me, Haley, who's here to talk Lincoln. And yes, I think I have like eight or less Steven Spielberg films left. We're almost towards the end. We've reached 2012 with this historical drama. And Haley, thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this show.
You know, I always love to do it. Gives me an excuse to watch some good stuff that I haven't seen in a while, in
Mhm.
this case.
Awesome. And Haley will be back. And I'll have Haley will be back for when we do John Carpenter too.
Yes.
But for those who have not seen Welcome to Wasteland before, we have three segments to this show. We have coming attractions for the week that this releases, which is November 18th, 2022, one day before my 31st birthday. So we're going to be having some fun this weekend. We're going to be seeing, well, some of us will be seeing one of the movies that we're going to talk about for coming attractions. But then we'll get into our feature film, which is indeed Lincoln. And then we'll get to some recommendations for all of you, and we have a couple of fun ones. And one very particular hidden gem that I want to share with people that I think is worth seeking out. But to get to coming attractions, this is an interesting weekend because this is a layover weekend. Wakanda Forever just came out last weekend. So, like, do you drop other movies the weekend after that to compete with it? So you basically have two films coming out that are probably the biggest films besides the Harvey Weinstein investigation film, She Said, which I guess that is the feel bad movie of the weekend. So, like, you want to be depressed, go watch She Said. But we have two movies about eating. One's about eating people, though, and that's Bones and All, which director Luca Guadagnino from Call Me By Your Name and Suspiria brings forth this young teenage romance with cannibals in it. And Haley, why is this the movie that stood out to you most for this weekend?
Well, first of all, just knowing that the person who made Call Me by Your Name did it and that Timothy
Mm,
Chalamet is in it, I'm like, oh, all right, I'm intrigued
mm,
because Call Me by Your Name is just one of those magical movies. Nothing could have prepared me for it when I saw it, and now you're telling me there's cannibalism involved. Like, I'm okay with gore and blood, so I'm intrigued. I'm
mm.
sure it'll be very stylized and artsy in how it's portrayed as well. Like it's not going to be some like brutish thing. I'm sure it'll be very like interesting and tasteful in its own way. So I mean,
Like
I would just want to
tasteful.
know like like so I think there's cannibalism like in the horror movie context of like, oh God, the cannibals are like Walking Dead, where it's just for
Yeah.
the sake of gore. But I imagine that in this movie, they are interrogating the question of what it means to eat people. And it's more of like a driving mechanism of the plot. Obviously, I haven't seen the movie, but this is,
Mm.
again, just knowing like what this guy's body of work is like already, I would expect it to be like the kind of thing where after you leave, you want to talk about what you just saw.
Oh, I
Um,
imagine, and I will talk about it on the internet, and maybe I'll get in some fights with this one too. Because I was telling Haley before we started recording, my first ever comment fight was on my Call Me by Your Name review. For the record, I love that film. That was my number 10, my top 10 of that year that came out because that is a beautiful, moving film. And there's very few dad speeches in a movie quite like Michael Stuhlbarg's speech in that. Which, how the hell did he like? How did like Armie Hammer, Michael Stuhlbarg not both get nominated for Best Supporting Actor for that movie? I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
The
But
soundtrack too, it just like that acting with that soundtrack. I mean, I still listen to that soundtrack sometimes. It like
yeah,
puts me in like a certain mental state when I hear it.
which is interesting because I kind of wish that this was coming out next weekend for my next episode, which coming up is the BFG. Actually,
Mm.
that's 2 episodes away because Mark Rylance is in Bones and All, and he plays an evil cannibal man. And in that movie, he's the big friendly giant. So that would have been an interesting dynamic, that dichotomy there. But like,
Flexibility. That's what you look for in a good actor.
well, because like Taylor Russell, who's in Bones and All, the young woman who's the lead, she's fantastic. I saw her in the movie Waves, and I can't wait to see her in this. And Timothy Chalamet, so hot right now. Timothy Chalamet, it's just like him and Tom Holland are just basically in everything.
It's at
If
least warranted. He's a really good actor. Gotta give it to
basically
him.
it's like if Adam Driver's too old for this movie, then you get Timothy Chalamet or Tom Holland to be in it at
Which
this point.
gaunt brunette do we want in our movie?
Yep. And like I'm a huge fan of Mark Rylance, which actually it also would have been fitting for next week because next week is Bridge of Spies, which is the film that put Mark Rylance on the spot because he won an Oscar for that.
Oh, did he?
He played
Dang.
a Russian spy. He beat Rocky. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, I Mark Rylance is great, but my God, Sylvester Stallone should have won for Creed. Like
yeah.
you had one job, Academy, was to give Sylvester Stallone an Oscar for that, and you didn't do it. I still remember that show. Like Mark Rylance winning landed like a lead balloon. That was just like, oh, but
Do
he's
you feel like
great.
he felt bad about it?
Oh no, I'm sure he's. I don't think he cared. So, but it has a really strong cast. Speaking of a strong cast, the other film that I wanted to talk about, because Bones and All is my most anticipated, but just for the sake of having some variety here, is The Menu, which, uh, speaking of so hot right now, Anya Taylor Joy is just basically Florence Pugh and Anya Taylor Joy are basically the only two young actresses working in Hollywood today, apparently. And she is so fantastic, and I'm excited to see her in this. I love Ray Fiennes and this role that he has here. And then you have this interesting supporting cast with like John Leguizamo and some other familiar faces. Um, I want to punch Nicholas Hoult in the face just based off of this trailer. He seems like such a douche. And if this turns out to be a cannibal movie too, I hope he gets eaten first. So
You heard it here first.
people are gonna die in this movie. Like it just seems like something terrible
The
is gonna happen
intensity
here.
is there, clearly, the undertone. But then
Well,
again, like that's the kitchen, you know? The kitchen is such an interesting setting
right?
for a movie because it actually is a very like intense place, like the restaurant world.
So, this is a quick recommendation, not officially part of the recommendation section of the show, but the a boiling point with Stephen Graham. Oh my God, that movie is intense as hell. That came out last year or earlier this year. It all bleeds together when you see hundreds of movies. Such a great movie. And it's literally one night, almost in real time in a kitchen.
I waitressed for years. I feel like that would trigger me, but you know.
Haley and I are sitting there watching, and Haley's just in the corner, just being like,
They wanted ranch with that. I forgot.
"There you go." So, two movies about eating, different kinds of things though, coming out this weekend. Next week's going to be very interesting because it's the Thanksgiving weekend. So there's like 8 movies coming out. So
The food movies, it's like an hors d'oeuvre before Thanksgiving. Maybe this is what they were doing. Someone was thinking about something. I'm telling you.
Haley, genius analysis here. Heard it here first. Haley has broken the code of release dates in Hollywood. Yes, we do have these crazy hors d'oeuvres coming into Thanksgiving next week. Hopefully, none of you are eating humans though. So there you go. Just eat some turkey or chicken or whatever. Just not humans, I guess.
Mac and cheese, stuffing,
Oh, I'm
cranberry
eating a
sauce.
lot of mac and cheese on Thanksgiving. I'm here for the sides. So
I'm a vegetarian. That's all sides for me.
there you go. Now, getting into our feature film of this week, which is Lincoln. And like I mentioned, so I've been on this Spielberg train since April, I think it was, or May.
Sounds about
So
right.
in a while. And this has taken me all the way up until the last week of December. And Lincoln is an interesting film because this era of Spielberg's an interesting time because kicking off with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which people have a lot of feelings about, um, things were very mixed with his filmography because like he's made some movies like the BFG and Ready Player One, which are like they're fine, they're not great, but then you have something, and like then people just put him in this box like he just made a bunch of Oscar bait movies, like The Post,
Mm,
Bridge of Spies, and Lincoln. I push back on that because they're all really great films and or really good films, and I do feel like if anybody else made them, they'd be like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" But it's Steven
mm,
Spielberg, so and Lincoln's such an interesting film because this is not a traditional biopic. We aren't getting little Abe chopping wood or wrestling or killing vampires. Um, which, oh man, what a companion piece to this movie, watching Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. But you have Lincoln, this very specific period in time, which was trying to pass the 13th Amendment. And not only is this like a character study of Lincoln, but boy, does it put a magnifying glass on the political system of the United States, which is definitely relevant, seeing as we just went through midterm elections. And this film, some interesting backstory is so Spielberg wanted Daniel Day-Lewis like really bad to do this. He didn't want to do it.
really?
Did not want to do it. So then next up was Liam Neeson.
I don't think that would have made a lot of sense. I love Liam Neeson, but first of all, he's not even an American guy. Daniel Day-Lewis is an American, right?
No, he's
Oh, he's
Irish.
not? He's also Irish?
Yep.
Wow, I never knew
Well,
that.
well, you can't tell
See, I
because he
just
just
think of him as like the Gangs of New York guy. Like he's like that's what he is in my head. He's
well
that
that
man walking around.
we'll get to well just think about it in an alternate universe, Abraham Lincoln and Bill the Butcher Cutting existed at the same time.
Isn't that crazy?
Crazy to think about. But yeah, Liam Neeson's a great actor. He just doesn't choose to do very interesting roles at this point most of the time. But I think it would have been an interesting thing to see him as Lincoln. But like, it's hard to think of anybody at this point as Lincoln after you watch Daniel Day Lewis in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah,
But,
absolutely. I feel like this, so we all know Lincoln. Like if you are raised in the United States, educated here, you know Lincoln perhaps better than almost any other president. You're
probably.
given these anecdotes, you know what he's done, but none of us know him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie, I mean, I don't know if it's accurate or not factually, but
Mm-hmm.
like I believe now that that
Yeah,
is Lincoln.
that is
And that's
Abraham
like
Lincoln right there.
a deep, difficult thing to do. And the movie had to sort of be the way it was, I think, for it to give that impression. Because it wasn't shoved down your throat. It was just like you were watching him live in,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like you said, like a critical moment, but still not like, oh, let's just follow Lincoln around the whole time.
Yeah. Which we'll so trust me, we'll get into the vast supporting cast of this movie,
Yeah.
which I keep making jokes every week on this show with the Steven Spielberg movies of like, oh my God, who's in this movie? This takes the cake.
Yeah.
Like there's so many people in this movie. But what I love about this is you really do get to understand who Abraham Lincoln is as a person, and I love him. I love him
Oh,
even
yeah.
more now after watching this movie. I'm like, this guy's a storyteller. And one of my favorite moments in this whole entire film is when they're in like the war room and Bruce McGill, who plays the Secretary of War, is like, wait a minute.
You're not gonna tell a story, are you?
You're not going to tell the story, are you? I don't think I could take any more of your damn stories.
It's like, well, have you met Lincoln? Because
Just storms off. And the best part is he doesn't even react. He just keeps, and he's so tender
yeah.
so much in this film. And he's just like, you know, nothing will make an Englishman shit quicker than the look of George Washington. I'm just like, that is one of my favorite jokes, period. Like, there's such a long setup to this joke, but it has such an amazing payoff. And every time I see a picture of George Washington, I just start doing my impression of Abraham Lincoln from this and tell that story because it's so funny. I love that he tells stories. I love the tenderness that he brings. And even like little things like, generally you meet somebody, you come out and shake their hands. That's like Lincoln comes up like both hands out and is like grabbing onto your hand, like, it's so nice to see you. And, but he's not just like this nice, tender pushover either. There's some
Right.
serious gears going, and there's that one particular scene in this film where he's explaining the duality and the contradictions of his own actions. And because like you could tell he's a lawyer. Like the way he's like spinning that logic with the whole thing of like, I used my war powers to seize their property, knowing fully well that they're not property. And it's like he is fully aware of the political games that he has to play to make things work. And he's just so great at it. And I think that tender like I wouldn't call it a facade because I think it is genuine. It's just like
Yeah.
that his personality diffuses people, disarms people, and then he can play them easier. And he does. And there's that one scene where he's meeting with all the conservative party with like Hal
Yeah.
Holbrook and all that group, and he's like, I am the president of these United States. You are gonna get me those votes. And I'm just like, he yelled at me like that. I'm getting him those votes.
Yeah, it harkens to such a different time in our history, and it really like I mean this movie teaches you so many things aside from what Abraham Lincoln was like. It definitely accomplishes that, but it
Yeah.
accomplishes a lot more. And one of the things that, like you said, I mean, watching it around the time, not only just near the midterms, but also just in the political era we're in, like what it meant to be the president of the United States at that time period, especially during a civil war, like where the country was tearing itself apart and you had to be someone who knew what you were doing
Yeah.
and who could really reckon with the whole of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it is terrible. And to act like everything you're doing is just faultless, I don't think you'd be able to keep the respect of others, but it's just such a stark contrast from how we see our leaders now act about everything, where it's like you can't make a mistake. Everything has to be like, well, that guy is just an idiot. And it's like,
Well, that's a thing because like it's so like media has changed the game so much because you're always constantly under a microscope. Here, he's doing all this like clandestine behind the scenes meetings and stuff like that, pulling all these strings, and it's just like you couldn't do that today.
yeah,
People find you out,
right.
and like the whole thing, it's like we heard from eyewitnesses that there is a peace commission in Washington, and like the whole
He's
note
like,
thing where it's like
nah.
where he's just like, as far as I know, there is no peace commission in or will be coming into Washington, D.C. And just like, lawyered that one, just spun that one because that's the thing. They were never going to come to Washington. They're hanging out on that riverboat outside of
Yeah.
Virginia, and all those games that he's playing and pulling strings and like it's so interesting too because like I'm not really a fan of President Biden, and like I think they could have put a piece of wood up against Trump in that election, and that piece of wood would have won. So that's
One would
and
hope.
like, yeah, and he won. And my biggest problem, especially like the first like half of his presidency so far, is just like all this stuff is going on. Somebody has to stop this, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you're the president.
And right, and this it's such a contrast because I feel like, what you're describing and just in general, it's this sense of like a thread that runs through the whole thing is conscience. Like
Yeah.
one's one's conscience like about what's going on from day to day, but also like in the end, like these decisions that are being made, it does ultimately like rest on the person. And when it comes down to the votes and all that stuff, it's about like a person sitting with themselves and making that decision. And like Lincoln, you can see that he is just this war has like taken such a toll on him.
Uh,
You can visibly like see him wrestling with that, but then like that's what makes this other thing so important. Like I have to do this.
and that moment, like I referenced earlier, where he's just like, "I'm the president of these United States," and just like, "Yeah, you are. You can
And that
get this
meant something.
done."
That
Yeah,
really did.
and he got it done, and that's what I respect so much. Is like he like the Lincoln portrayed in this film, which may or may not be the actual Lincoln, because how the hell are we supposed to know? Like hundreds of years later, but he knew the responsibility of the executive and he owned it. And he's
Hmm.
just like, I'm the president. We're going to get stuff done. And I find so fascinating because like in context of today, Lincoln is a beloved figure for the most part amongst all kinds of people.
Hmm.
And watching this movie and realizing like, yeah, just like today, everybody just hates everybody. It's just like Lincoln's stuck in the middle because the conservatives are mad because he would even consider continuing this war or would even consider sitting down with these radical progressive Republicans who are like, black people are equal. And that whole entire thing where he couldn't even keep his own party together.
Hmm.
And that's the Democratic Party today, where
Right.
it's just like the moderates just yelling at the progressives and the progressives yelling at the moderates. And now it's very interesting with as the Republican Party splitting between the DeSantis clan over here and the Trumpers on this side. And this film captures that so well. And
Yeah.
you have Lee Pace, his character, who's like the big Lincoln Tyrannus, that guy,
Hmm.
and like his very obvious like mentor, the older gentleman, who are obviously like the farthest to the extreme on the Democrat side here. And obviously, it's important to remember they were just flipped at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's
like
confusing, but you obviously pick up on it. Like the Republicans are the ones who are actually gunning for like the
progressive,
equality and
yeah, and stuff like that. And you have like the other Democrats here who are just like, no. And like Michael Stuhlbarg's character right at the center of it, where he's just like, I don't believe in slavery, but we're not prepared to let them go. And and then the whole entire thing where they ask him his vote and he just like squeals it out loud.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and the, it's such a fascinating commentary on politics, and it's fun. So like generally, I hate politics. I hate watching
Mm.
stuff because it's just so frustrating. Because like this is the world I live in. This is not. I can have
Yeah.
fun sitting back and watching this. And
And knowing how it ends.
yeah, exactly. And spoiler alert, it passed.
Yeah,
So, and I just imagine, like, is this what Congress is like? Should I watch C-SPAN sometime?
it's not like that
No, it
anymore.
is not.
Not
Uh,
nearly as exciting. Not nearly as much like English Parliament.
well, no, this felt like Parliament.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
I
like,
think it was clearly derived
yeah,
at
like
that
people just
stage.
yelling at each other. Tommy Lee Jones just sassing over in his seat. It's like, no, I don't believe people are created equal, you disgusting lizard.
Yeah,
I'm just like, oh man. Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but so I think this is a good time to kind of transition into the ridiculous supporting cast in this movie. So I'm gonna take a few moments to pull up IMDb here and just list off the ridiculous amount of people that are in this movie. So right off the bat, obviously Daniel Day-Lewis, who won his Oscar. This was his third and final Oscar that he won before retiring. After There Will Be Blood and My Left Foot. Arguably could have won a fourth one for Phantom Thread on his way out, but
that was quirky. That one was
I
quirky.
I was pulling for him because I thought his performance in that was amazing. I have never seen somebody so mad watching somebody butter toast before. Like I saw like the venom in his eyes. It's just like, how dare you make noise at breakfast? Um,
Yeah,
but you have Sally Field as Mary Todd Lincoln, which this is one of like the meatiest roles I think she's gotten in like decades at this point. And because like Sally Field was in like Norma Ray and Smokey and the Bandit, and she's Mama Gump
oh
from Forrest
yeah.
Gump.
Yeah, I
But
forgot about that.
your mama really cares about your education. David Strathairn, who is a really famous character actor, plays William Seward, like his right hand guy who's
Yeah,
there the whole entire time. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is Robert
his
Lincoln, who
son.
pops up. Our little crew of vote getters,
Yes.
W and Bilbo, James Spader in this movie with his mustache and the moment he takes that mallet out to smash the lobster that he's eating is hilarious. Like that crew is great between James Spader, John Hawkes, and then Tim Blake Nelson. Um, Tommy Lee Jones, who, if I'm not mistaken, got nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this movie,
That's
which,
well deserved.
oh my God, he is so great. He is such a sass bucket in this movie. And
But man, if you gotta honor someone, Thaddeus Stevens is no joke. Like, you
yeah,
gotta play that character. He
and
was
he
a character in history too.
Yo, and he played it well. Jackie Earle Haley is Alexander Stevens, who's the vice president of the Confederacy, who's part of
Mm,
the crew that comes in. I mentioned Bruce McGill earlier, who's Edwin Stanton, who's the Secretary of War. Jared Harris is Ulysses S. Grant, which I thought was a very interesting choice. I mentioned Lee Pace earlier. Um, Jeremy Strong of Succession fame
mm.
plays like I think he's Lincoln's like handman, like who helps him out at the end. Michael Stuhlbarg is the I think he was from Kentucky Yeoman.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
right. One of the guys they were trying to swing.
yeah, Walton Goggins is also one of the ones that they make him the post office, like the
Yeah.
postman.
Yes.
Um, and the opening scene of this movie has Coleman Domingo, David Oyelowo, and Dane DeHaan in it. And I'm just like,
Just throw him
wait,
in there.
wait, what? And Adam Driver's in this?
I was gonna say, don't forget our little friend doing Morse code or whatever with the with the
Exactly.
little
Adam Driver
telegraph
just
thing.
casually in here. The Jolly family who comes in earlier in the films, Bill Camp and Elizabeth Marvel. It's just like there's so many people in this movie. And Wayne Duvall, who is Homer Stokes from Oh Brother Where Art Thou. He's
Mm.
he's one of the he's one of the progressive Republican senators who comes in with Thaddeus Stevens to that party, and you have that whole entire back and forth with Sally Field and Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's like I never thought that all of my housework and anything could be something worth investigating. And it's like, well, your books are just so darn interesting. Just like there you go. It's just there's so many, and like there's even tons of character actors that like you know who they are, you recognize them throughout this film, and it's just such an amazing cast of actors. And because who wouldn't want to be in a Spielberg movie? That's the thing. And this cast, there's so many characters in it in just general. You have the whole entire House of Representatives that you have to like
Mm-hmm.
fill out here because they don't even touch the Senate because the Senate had already ratified, like passed it in the Senate, and they have all the representatives there, and then obviously like his cabinet and all these actors here, and there's so many talented actors, and luckily some of them did get some Oscar recognition. I don't think anybody won besides, and I don't know if this film won anything besides best actor that Daniel Day-Lewis won, but like this got nominated for a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised. I'm pulling up well, some pieces of information here too. This made a worldwide gross of $275 million on a $65 million budget. So realistically, it made its money back. And then
Yeah, for sure.
looking at trying to find it on IMDb awards, it won 2 Oscars. It won production design too, which
It
I
does
wouldn't
very
be shocked
well.
if this won costume too, but apparently it did not. It was nominated for Best Picture. I'm pretty sure this lost to Argo
I think that sounds right,
in
but I could be
2012.
wrong. Yeah, that sounds
Um,
right.
Tommy Lee Jones is up for Best Supporting Actor. That was a stacked year for Best Supporting Actor because I'm pretty sure it was like almost all former winners
Hmm.
of all 5 of them. And it's just like, well, that's a crazy group. Sally Field was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Steven Spielberg was nominated for directing. I think the most controversial thing about the directing Oscar that year was that Ben Affleck didn't even get nominated for
What did he direct
Argo.
that year? Oh, oh, I see.
So, because that's very rare, like a film wins Best Picture and they weren't even nominated for Best Director.
Yeah, that doesn't
Uh,
make a lot of sense.
no,
I didn't even realize he's the one who directed that.
well, that's how he got in the movie. Because why else would you? Why else would you cast Ben Affleck as a uh, Latino American CIA agent?
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. You're really not.
So,
Well, why would you cast an Irishman as Abe Lincoln? Because you know that you're
well, because it's
gonna.
Daniel Day Lewis. That's why.
How
um,
tall is Daniel Day-Lewis? Do you have any idea?
I think he's 6 foot tall, 6'1", maybe.
Okay, so they must have they ha see that's another directing feat then
Mm.
to pull off because his presence and his stature are also like hammered home in this in so much of like the way the movie is set up in every scene like
Well, and I think too, a lot of the other actors in this movie aren't particularly tall either,
maybe
and
they
that
made that
works.
choice.
And Daniel Day Lewis is thin as a rail.
Yeah.
So like that kind of there's one particular scene in this film that I really think felt like a play because like I feel like this movie could have been a play.
Yeah.
And it's the one scene in their bedroom where like him and Mary Todd are
I
getting
was
really at
thinking
it.
about that. About how she's like
And
down and he's up and yeah.
and he's just like lifting his arms like this. It's like I should have put you in that loony bin, and it's just like, dang, this is a toxic marriage we got going on here. Well, that's the thing because you feel it. There's so much trauma in this family because like they lost their child, and now obviously Mary Todd Lincoln doesn't want Robert to go into the military, but he has this like need to represent his country. But then his father's stuck in like, do I honor what my son wants or do I have to listen to my wife? Because like, if I let you in, I'll never hear the end of it, kind
Well,
of
and it's not
thing.
just here from my wife, but like that's his wife. His wife does not mince words.
No,
She is like a force in and of herself, clearly.
absolutely. And just to round this out too, so like this got nominated for best adapted screenplay from Tony Kushner, who actually wrote Fablemans, the new film that Steven Spielberg has coming out, and
Oh,
then of
cool.
course Yanis Kaminski for cinematography and John Williams for score, because the two of them have been working for Spielberg for years.
Yeah.
And this film, I it just frustrates me on some level that I think a lot of people just write this off as like Oscar bait, and I don't think that's fair because I do think this is a really great film, and there's so
It's a
much.
challenging film. There's nothing shallow about it. Like it's work to watch that movie.
Well, yeah, and there's so much depth and complexity to the politics of it all, to the weight of the like the whole entire idea of for how many years up to this point the United States has had slaves. We've accepted that and defines people, black people, to not be equal and to be able to be considered property. And this film has to tackle like the compromises that you have to make on your own moral code. Like that one scene where the one progressive Republican calls out Tommy Lee Jones for not on like up there.
Not going fast far enough.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm gonna do what I need to do to pass this legislation, and that's the thing, and making those compromises on things, and like he got it done though.
I think that's the most important thing about like this movie and why I think it was so important to tell that story. Like obviously it's great to learn about Lincoln and everything as well out around it. Like there was just but there was so much going on and
Mhm.
really after watching it it's only the second time I've ever seen it because I saw it once and was like, "Whoa, that was heavy." And then you wanted to talk about it with me and
Yeah.
I'm like, "All right, I'll do it. I gotta rewatch that thing." But really, like this last time coming out of it, I just was like, it was so close. And again, I don't know how much of it was played up and dramatized for the point of the story, but my impression is I think it's accurate to say that Lincoln put a lot on the line for this.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of people who were all happy to say, like, well, yeah, I think that, you know, the slaves should be free and African Americans should not be enslaved. But then when it came time to like vote, they were like, "Rrr," and you're like, that it was close. And if he hadn't just, again, like made it a matter of conscience and just kept hammering and hammering and making people, even people who like morally believed in it, like, no, it's happening now. It has to happen now. Like, oh my God, like just thinking about that sacrifice that he made and like what could have happened, where would we be, you know? And it's just like, because what all of us watching it are like, of course, but like there are things even now that there are people in our country who grapple with that are very similar, where it's like, oh, well, you know,
Well,
that's
and
important.
even 10 years later, this film is still so relevant to
Exactly.
our political system. And I'm going to keep quoting this particular review because I loved Tragedy of Macbeth from
Mm,
Joel Cohen, because I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan.
yes.
But one of my favorite critics, Lonzo Giraldi's like, but why? Like, why did we need a Macbeth adaptation in 2001, 2021? Like, what was the motivation? Like, on some level, I know, like, Frances McDormand really wanted to play Lady Macbeth.
Mm.
Like, it's like, I have a husband who's a director. And you have to find some reason to adapt something or to remake something in a particular time, or really what was the point
Yeah.
and of it. And there's a reason why you make in today's political landscape, because like what was the political landscape in 2012 was President Obama was getting reelected for a second term, and like this whole entire landscape of our political system, there's so much commentary of it in this film, and that's what makes it so relevant. Like, yeah, of
Yeah.
course it's about Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln lived what's gonna be closer to 2 centuries ago than 1 century ago, which is really weird to think about.
Yeah.
But like, this is really a film about our political system and what it really means to be a leader in
Yeah.
that system. And I think some people can learn a few things about watching this movie. And I think this is an important film to watch, and how it does portray all these things. And, the House of Representatives is a bit of a circus in this film. But here's the thing, our political system's a circus all the time at
Yeah.
this point. People are pandering to Twitter, TikTok, and doing all of these things. And this is the circus, and we all have a front row seat, which
And
is,
in the end, what we crave, I think, is a leader who truly like has a moral compass and knows it's not about like will I get elected or not. It's about what is right.
yeah.
What am I here to do? Like, where am I taking this country? And I don't think it's like in many of the candidates we see nowadays, that's not it. It's not what we're seeing anymore. This like very clear sense of what do we want for our country. And this person has their conscience and they wrestle with their responsibilities every day, you know, and they're willing to accept the toll that it takes on themselves because that's the job and that's the only way you can do something that truly matters. And like this was one of those moments where what he was doing was so insanely important.
And it still matters today. And there we
And
go.
it's not Oscar bait because that's a story that like tell it to your blue in the face. Like it's still relevant today for sure.
Yeah, this isn't like Green Book, which
Exactly.
I enjoyed Green Book.
I did too. I mean, come on. It's an enjoyable movie.
Exactly. But like, it's definitely sugarcoating things. This one doesn't sugarcoat things. It really presents our system how it is. But we definitely got a little heavy here on Welcome to the Wasteland this week. Obviously, because this is a deeply meaningful film in terms of our whole entire political system. But I guess, Haley, do you have any last minute thoughts or anything that you wanted to throw out about Lincoln?
I do. There's one thing I was thinking about having seen it again, and I want to get your take on it. There's only one thing about this movie that I would say I didn't like,
Mm-hmm.
and it was that they showed the end where he dies.
Yeah,
I think we all know he does. And I think if they had ended it with him just leaving, we all knew
yeah.
when he was leaving and he like put those gloves down that was it. We knew where he was going. And I don't think they had to show it. I think it kind of like petered out instead of it being this really like because again, it wasn't about his life. It was about this moment.
Well, and I 100% agree. And that's one of the main reasons why I didn't give this like a 5 out of 5 on my little TikTok review that I did. Because like you're riding high off of this. And then you're like, and then there's another scene. And then there's another scene. And then there's another scene. And you're
Like
just
if they had
like,
ended with that speech bit, like if it had faded from him in the hallway to that speech, it
yep,
still would have been super powerful, still would have brought a tear to my eye because we know he's dead, because we know everyone knows what happened.
yeah, we know he died in a theater. It's just like he got shot. We get it. And yeah, I
That's not what this
100%
movie was
agree.
about.
And they could have cut out like 10, 15 minutes at the end of the movie. Then this is a 2 hour or 2.5 hour movie. So
Yeah,
we could have got some of
yeah,
that time back.
yeah.
And it just from a pacing perspective and a narrative perspective, it just felt excessive and unnecessary. And I agree.
Okay. I didn't know if you that like I hadn't remembered that being something that bothered me, but this time it like really did, and I was like,
Well,
this is the
it
only
definitely
thing.
did for me too, sitting there watching it because I'm like, oh, we're getting to the end. I'm like, where's the 30 minutes left of this? And then I'm just like, oh,
Gosh darn it.
I'm like, ugh,
Yeah.
it should have ended there.
He could have just told another anecdote. That would have been fine.
Yeah. And I just wanted Bruce McGill to walk back on screen. It's like, again, and just like walk out. Um, but yeah, I agree. And, you know, it's hard to end a film. It's hard to
Well,
make.
I've never made one, so I wouldn't know, but I imagine that's true.
Well, like, I feel like one of the hardest things to do is stick a landing to a movie
Yeah.
and really like ending it where it needs to. And I just feel like, yeah, this goes a couple beats too far and it could have wrapped up.
Yeah.
But that's a
But
wrap.
overall, yeah.
Yes, this is a great film. But that is a wrap on our thoughts on Lincoln. And we have some recommendations for you. And now for something completely different. So, Haley, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
So, Shane and I were talking a little bit before this, and it's funny, I oftentimes if I'm thinking of seeing something in the theater, I will ask Shane in
Mm,
advance because he's almost always seen it. I'm like, do I spend the money? Because it's not just the ticket, it's the slushy, it's the popcorn. Like
hmm.
going to the movies nowadays, it's an investment, and I'm willing to make it. But I had asked him about Bullet Train, and he was like, it's a little all over the place. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I ended up waiting, and I saw it at home. But I still think, even at home, it is worth a watch
Yeah.
because honestly, like again, talking about a movie that's got all kinds of people in it, where it's just like a delight to see these random people show up like all over the place. It's great. And I know that we'll be contemplating the best Guy Ritchie movie shortly. But this
Mm,
kind of like, it's not the same, but th there are things about it that are the same insofar as you've just got this cast of characters. No one's particularly a good person. They're all just sort of like after something
yep.
and all hell breaks loose. But you've got these like clever bits that carry through, and it's just fun. Like, honestly, it's a great thing to pop on the TV, sit back, and just let happen to you.
Yeah.
But just don't think too hard about it, because obviously some things fall through if you think too hard about it. But it great time. I loved it.
And it's a great time. It's a lot of fun until it goes off the rails, literally and narratively a bit. But it's still like David Leitch knows how to make a thrilling ride of a movie, and the cast is fantastic in it. They make it so worth it. I have two recommendations. One of my movies that I rewatched recently, and a new film out in theaters, which that one is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. And I love this film. It's presently in my top 10 of the year. I thought this was a great sequel to the first Black Panther film. I think overall it wound up being a little bit better for me, only because third act of the first movie loses me a bit with the whole
Mm.
rubber band Black Panther fight and rhinos. But like I think this film balances a giant tightrope of what to do to handle the death of Chadwick Boseman, and I think they do. There's so much emotion in it. Like
I'm
this
gonna
is
cry
really,
so hard.
it is a very weighty film, and I think it's fascinating what they did with Namor and Atlantis and how it transformed into Namor and Tolakan, this new Mayan-based underwater civilization. And Tanakh Harada, who plays Namor, kills it. He is intense and magnetic, and he is a great antagonist in this film. And thematically, it builds off of the first film and puts Letitia Wright, Shuri, in a very interesting place, and get um this woman an Oscar for why the heck am I completely blanking on her name now? Um who plays Ramonda, the Queen of Wakanda.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my god, she is amazing. She is absolutely amazing, and I'm just like, you can even tell from the trailer that like
Yeah. That
she's
trailer made
absolutely.
me feel things that some movies haven't made me feel.
Angela Bassett is so amazing in this film. And like the whole thing where she's like, I have lost everything. Like that scene in context of the movie, you're just like,
Yeah.
oh my
I can't
God.
even think about it too hard. Oh my God. I'm gonna have to bring
Yeah.
an entire box of tissues.
And I have to say, there is a particular appearance of a character that is pretty unexpected that absolutely show stopping scene getting this character in this movie, and I was so happy about it. But like it's such a great film. I was so happy about Wakanda Forever, and I definitely like it more than a lot of people, it seems, but I think it's pretty great. Now the other film that I wanted to recommend is something completely different than anything we've talked about so far in this episode, which is An Unmarried Woman. And this is a basic like human drama in like the 1970s. The actress, leading actress in this film, is absolutely amazing. I loved her so much. I remember watching this film back when it was either at the end of college or like early grad school kind of time. And Jill Clayburgh, who stars in this film as a woman whose husband winds up having an affair and winds up leaving her. And it's really an intriguing and engrossing um exploration of like sexual politics and relationships and all those kinds of things in a very specific time in the late 70s with like the
Mm,
rise of feminism and stuff like that. And it's really just this woman struggling and redefining herself and her sexuality and stuff like that. It's a very moving and honest film, and I remember watching this for the first time because like this does not seem like the kind of movie that would be something that would like blow me away, and I loved it. And then I just rewatched it this weekend for the first time. I have it on Criterion Collection disc because they finally released it, and it's a great film. And if you have a chance to check it out, I'd highly recommend it.
awesome. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm definitely gonna tell you the second I get out of Wakanda Forever, and we'll talk about it.
And
But that
Haley's
sounds really
gonna
good
be
too.
bawling her eyes out as she's talking on the phone because like
Shane, I saw the movie.
there's one. So just to warn everybody, there's no after the credit scene. It's one mid credit scene.
Thank you.
And the mid
Important
credit
info.
scene is a doozy from an emotional standpoint.
Oh
So it's
my
just like,
God.
well, you thought you were done. Bam! Punch you in the
You
face
you
again.
thought you cried when everyone turned into dust in front of your eyes in Infinity War? Well, prepare.
Oh, I cried. I teared up at least two or three times during Endgame. This movie's emotional, and you're just like, oh, I didn't sign up for this feels trip today. And it really does deliver. But that is a wrap on this episode of Welcome to the Wasteland. But Haley, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks as always for having me and again challenging me to watch some good movies that I haven't seen in a while.
There we go. And Haley and I we'll be recording an episode of Wasteland Talks, a classic review of Snatch, in person in a couple of days.
Yes.
So look out for that one coming out. It'll probably be in a couple weeks. I have backlogged episodes of that show where I'm just like, oh, I have like 3 weeks out already. But it'll come out. We just released our episode of talking about our favorite horror films, so you should go check that one out too. Shameless plugs all around. But thank you all as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.